Hello, my name is Michael West, and I'm the co-CEO of BioTime and CEO of AgeX Therapeutics. Today we'll be discussing AgeX, and in doing so I'll be making certain forward-looking statements that have associated risks and uncertainties, and so we refer our viewers to our filings with the Securities and Exchange Commission for more detailed information about the company. With me today is Aubrey DeGray. He's AgeX Therapeutics Vice President of New Technology Discovery. Welcome, Aubrey.
Thank you so much for having me.
Why don't you tell our viewers something about yourself?
Well, so I am a biomedical gerontologist of many years standing, though not quite as many as you, and I have for some time now been the Chief Science Officer of a public charity, a 501c3, based just south of here in Mountain View, which works on very much the same kinds of things that BioTime and AgeX work on. We are interested in developing new therapeutics that are able, in principle, to actually postpone the ill health of old age far more effectively than anything that exists today. And we are a non-profit because we have tended to focus on things that are particularly early stage, but our goal has always been to move things along to a sufficient level of proof of concept that we can essentially kickstart an industry, that these projects can be spun out into startup companies that will attract investment from all over the world. We believe, very much as you've always believed, that the anti-aging industry based on technologies that really work, which is what we're trying to create, is going to be by far the biggest industry of all time. And so as we now get to the point where these projects, these research programs are getting to that point, it's an extraordinarily fantastic opportunity for me personally to finally be working personally and officially with you rather than just being friends as we have been for 20 years.
Right.
I think that, Mike, you've occupied a really pivotal role in the anti-aging world for a very long time as by far the most effective advocate of true anti-aging research within the private sector. And I feel very proud to have been able to bring other projects forward so that they can complement in the private sector now some of those things, and working directly with you in AgeX is going to be a very big part of that.
So that's the SENS Foundation that you were speaking of?
SENS Research Foundation, that's right. We're a relatively small organization. We only have a budget of about $4 million per year, but we use it pretty efficiently. We have our own headquarters and laboratory in Mountain View where we do some of our projects, and we also fund work extramurally, so to speak, in places like the Buck Institute up in Marin and also in various universities.
And so your involvement in AgeX is as a part-time employee, a 30% time employee?
Right, yes. My primary role is going to continue to be as the Chief Scientist at SENS Research Foundation, but I believe that having this dual role will further emphasize and accelerate the pipeline, so to speak, the ability of SENS Research Foundation to exist as the kind of engine room of this industry. Of course, there will be no formal association between SENS Research Foundation and AgeX in the sense of any kind of pipeline between the two, because that would actually contravene 501c3 rules. But the emphasis that it gives to have the personnel overlap is definitely going to, I think, emphasize how strongly this whole technology, this whole body of technology is moving into the private sector in a manner that investors can really take seriously now.
So you've been in the field of aging research, or as we say, gerontology, for quite a while now. Why is now the right time in your mind? I mean, there's a sense out there, more than a sense, that we're on the verge of a revolution in biotechnology and medicine, focusing on the problems of aging. Why now? People have been growing old for a long time.
This is certainly true, yeah. I mean, and I think for, since well before we were born, there have been people like us who have understood that aging is ultimately the world's foremost medical problem, and therefore the world's foremost problem, period. However, of course, the phenomenon of aging is such a fantastically complicated one that progress in actually understanding it well enough and figuring out a sufficient variety of ways to manipulate the body and so as to postpone the ill health of old age, that's been a big, big challenge. And each of us in the field at the coalface have been seeing the incremental advances that scientists are making, and we've been excited by that ourselves. But at the end of the day, the real answer to your question, the reason why now is the time, is not an answer that we as scientists are giving, it's an answer that investors are giving. Investors have a particular sense of how long a timeline to actual products, actual profitability they want to be interested in. And we are now in a position of succeeding, people like us at Sense Research Foundation and of course you yourself, succeeding in demonstrating to investors in rigorous ways that many of these technologies are actually at that point.
I used to live on the East Coast, and they talked about nor'easters, the perfect storm. Two storm fronts merging together. And it seems to me there's two forces at work here. One is this surge, this tidal wave of the baby boomers, some 76 million Americans, causing this upwelling of demand for the problems of aging. And the second, though, is the power of medical technologies to address complex problems like aging. Back in the 60s, some of us remember President Nixon declaring war on cancer. The problem was medical research didn't have the tools, really, back then, the molecular tools we have today to decipher the riddle of cancer. Mm. But if today, we had a president declaring a war on cancer, I think there's a consensus, don't you think, that we could really do something about cancer today, and are doing something about cancer, of course. But don't you think that these two factors, the amazingly powerful medical research technology of today, then this demand together make this perfect storm a real opportunity to build significant value for shareholders by attacking the core biology of aging itself, not just a new pill for stroke or heart disease?
I couldn't agree more. And I think there's another dimension to it as well, which is the increasing understanding, especially in certain parts of the USA, Silicon Valley is famous for it, I guess, of the value of taking on a visionary investment, a high-risk, high-reward investment. The people who do that tend to be the people who make the most spectacular profits in the long run, if they're not scared of some failures because they know that when they do hit the jackpot, it's going to be a real jackpot. I believe that there is still, at this point, a challenge for many more conservative investors, more risk-averse investors, in getting into this field. But those are the investors that are not going to really hit the big bucks with this industry. The ones that are going to really capitalize 10 years from now, even 15 years from now, are people who have the vision to get involved at these early-stage companies, these early-stage technologies that are going to change the world.
So let's in the short time we have here today, talk about three of our strategic choices for initial product development within AgeX. So as I mentioned, the smart way to approach this, and I can't claim that we're the smartest in the world, but we certainly have given this more thought than the average person in the industry, is going at the heart of aging itself, the central mechanisms of aging. And so BioTime provides this platform of pluripotent stem cell technology. We think these cells are important because they are naturally immortal cells, and products you make from them, and we can make all the cells of the human body, sort of replacement parts for the human body, are all born young, the same way babies are born young, and for the same reason, by the way. And so out of all of the over 200 diverse cell types we know we can make from pluripotent stem cells using our pure stem technology, which are the greatest payoffs, the greatest opportunities for aging and chronic degenerative diseases of aging, where some 80% of healthcare costs in the United States are currently expended. The first that we've chosen as a major area of focus are brown adipocytes, which maybe many of our viewers have not heard of, new cells recently discovered in humans that we believe can correct this imbalance that we see in metabolism in aging. Cells that when they're lost in the normal course of aging can throw that balance off, causing weight gain where when we're young we normally were trim, but also can cause an imbalance in the metabolism of glucose, so it can lead to type 2 or adult onset diabetes. Brown adipocytes, currently not available for human therapy. What do you think, from your background research in demographics of aging, how big of a problem is metabolic disorders in aging?
I really think that it's an inspired choice on your part to go this way out of the 200 choices you had, to look at brown adipocyte precursors as a really prominent place to go at an early stage. And one reason for why I think that was such a great choice is because the problem that you've just mentioned of insulin resistance and impaired sugar metabolism is something that is certainly an age-related problem. Type 2 diabetes mainly affects the elderly, but it's a problem which has a much better prospect of being corrected on its own than most of aging, which is so intertwined. There are quite a few drugs out there that have some impact on type 2 diabetes already. This is an approach which could be very much more effective than anything that's around today. The other reason, though, that it makes such sense is because it does actually, as you say, have a big part to play in the more general phenomenon of aging. These things interact a great deal. No part of aging is really an island, so to speak. Right. And that certainly brings me always to think about the systemic environment of any cell. If you put cells, however young they are, in isolation into an old body, then they face a real challenge in actually doing good. And there's only a certain extent to which that challenge can be addressed simply by putting an awful lot of those cells in. Mm-hmm. Sometimes one's got to do a bunch of other things at the same time. So in the way that I've always thought about aging for 20 years as very much a divide and conquer problem where we need to do a panel of different things at the same time, I'm immediately driven to think in terms of other kind of adjunct therapies, adjunct approaches that can be perhaps co-administered along with brown adipocyte precursors so as to further synergize and further amplify the impact and the benefits that could be achieved. We know, for example, that the systemic environment, what's going on in the blood, it has a great deal to do with how effective certain stem cell populations can be. There's a lot of news, of course, all the time about the potential of young plasma, for example, to rejuvenate old people. And this is, very legitimate science. We've funded some of it ourselves. And I think that this kind of thinking, whether it actually leads to particular combinations of products in the end, is going to be the way in which we really solve the problem of aging in the next decade or more.
Well, let's talk about the number one killer. Coronary disease, cardiovascular disease. Many of the people watching this video, I'm sure, had loved ones that had heart disease. I lost my father from a heart attack. There was never a greater man to walk the planet. What a loss. And yet, how ridiculous this is. It's plumbing. Blood vessels need to feed the tissues with blood flow, and in aging, you have that plumbing goes awry, and the heart muscle cannot get enough oxygen, enough blood flow, and you lose the life of a loved one. The number one killer. So during embryonic development, when the body's first formed, there are a unique population of vascular forming progenitors. As the body is developing, they can sense where blood flow is needed, and they move in that direction and build the vascular tree out of nothing. We have those vascular progenitors. We filed patents on them, along with the brown adipocytes, of course. And so one of the products slated for development in AgeX are vascular progenitors for, as we say, ischemic disease, the poor vascularization we have. The older we get, your leg falls asleep, but rarely would have happened when we're younger, and it happens with increasing frequency. Vascular aging is a big problem. Your thoughts on the nature of that problem and how that product could fit in to be used in treating an aging population?
Yeah, I think that the problems of an aging vasculature and an aging heart are actually perhaps an even better example than the case of fat, of the heterogeneity of aging, of the multifaceted nature of it. So there are many different ways in which the heart fails during aging. There's atherosclerosis, where coronary arteries become gunked up with fat, and that happens as a result of essentially white blood cells being poisoned by cholesterol. But then there's a completely different process called arteriosclerosis, which involves things like calcification and, of course, stiffening of the walls of the major arteries, causing hypertension. Then there are less well understood, less well known things like amyloidosis, which is actually waste product accumulating not even inside cells, but in the spaces between cells and weakening the ability of the heart muscle to do its job. There's another type of cell that actually you guys might end up being really interested in AgeX, and we might work on as a new product, which are the pacemaker cells in the sinus node. This is a type of cell that most people have never even heard of, but if you don't have them, then your heart just doesn't beat because the brain can't tell it to beat. And it turns out that a large majority of those cells are lost by old age. So we might want to get into replacing those with cells that can be generated using pure stem sometime soon. These are the kinds of things that I'm always thinking about in this area, and I believe that certainly getting a foothold in the vascular aging space is a very good decision for AgeX starting out.
So much to talk about and so much to do. Such a great opportunity. So let's just touch briefly on what has for some years now been a top secret project, as we say, a skunkworks project in BioTime, but we're beginning to talk about, and that's induced tissue regeneration, or ITR. And so for those that are not familiar with this, early in human development, when the body's first forming, there's an ability to regenerate tissues if they're injured. And so the classic example, is skin. In the beginnings of human development, if you do a full thickness cut in the skin, you and I would heal that, in a sense, with a nasty scar. But when the body's first forming, it regenerates scarlessly. How amazing it would be if we understood how that worked. And so for people who have bad body burns or have surgery, but let's extend that to the whole body. The heart scars after a heart attack. The brain scars, in a sense, a gliatic scar, after a stroke. It cannot regenerate. If we could unlock that ability to regenerate again, what a brave new frontier that would be. Of course, that's what we believe we've filed, what we believe may be the first important patent applications in this emerging field of medicine. Could you give our viewers some perspective on how you think ITR might fit into this toolbox for aging going forward?
Sure, totally. Yeah. So ITR is kind of, in essence, a much more systemic concept than the use of individual pure stem-derived cells. And that certainly is an important contrast. But I think it's probably worth emphasizing that this does not in any way mean that ITR would be any kind of substitute for everything else. There's no way, I think you and I have always understood, that there's no way there's ever going to be one single treatment that will completely universally address all aspects of the ill health of old age. Nevertheless, the tissue-specific approaches that are exemplified by pure stem technology and the ITR technology, which will be kind of more pan-organ, pan-tissue, these things are sure to complement each other very powerfully. And I would go further. I would say that ITR is a concept that goes beyond scarring. Scarring, of course, is something that is a natural and very desirable reaction to acute injury, in the sense that the necessity is to heal the injury really fast, or you're going to die of an infection or something else.
Right.
But of course, cleaning up that collateral damage later on at the body's leisure, so to speak, is something that doesn't get done. I think we've got to remember the concept that this ITR process may very well also address what you might call microscars, things that we don't really see as scars, but are just caused by much more diffuse, generalized problems of individual cells dying and getting in or individual cells getting into a bad state. All of these things I think are going to go together.
The stiffening of tissues, fibrosis, that happens in the body of age. Okay, so we walked through briefly some of the initial product areas of focus of AgeX, the brown adipocytes, the vascular cells, and then this important new field of ITR. Put it together with your reviewing what's going on out there. There's competition to AgeX. Some of these companies, may be going public in the coming year. There's a lot of buzz about what biotechnology will do going forward in aging. How would you, for our viewers, compare the platform that we're doing here at AgeX to some of the other things being done in the world?
Well, I think the main thing I would say about that comparison is that from an investor's point of view, it's a rather different field than most. And this really kind of comes back again to what I was emphasizing earlier about the divide and conquer nature of aging, the fact that we're going to have to do lots of different things. That fact of our biology essentially imposes on the industry a much greater requirement and incentive to collaborate and synergize and work together rather than to compete. I mean, of course, in this industry, just as in any other, there will be successes and there will be failures. But I think that there will be many more successes than there are in a typical industry where everyone's competing with everybody else, because in this case, the actual logic of the health phenomenon on the ground is going to dictate a lot of collaborations.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Aubrey, for taking some time to brief our viewers on AgeX and its plans going forward, and hopefully we'll have future videos that update our investors on our progress.
Absolutely.
As we approach
and
this
it's going to be a
problem.
delight to work with you in AgeX.
Likewise.
Let's do it.